Okay, problems with the astronomical theory. The long-period elements of the Earth's orbit, wobble, precision, tilt, eccentricity, influence the solar radiation received, particularly in its geographical distribution. However, the total heating due to the solar radiation integrated over the entire globe annually only varies significantly with the eccentricity, since the total heating due to eccentricity varies by less than 0.2%, not even 2%, not 20, not 200. A major task, therefore, has been to show that this small change in heating, in fact, the smallest periodic fluctuation in solar heating, could lead to cyclic glaciation of the Earth on the order of 100,000 years. Come on, guys. The science of evolution is comic book and all this other stuff. The climate state of the Earth is not a simple function of total solar heating. It also appears to be dependent on the distribution by latitude. The Earth modulates solar heating by reflection, radiation, retention, and redistribution of received energy. A complete theory for the interaction of these effects has not been developed. Because confidence is so high in the statistical basis of the astronomical theory as an explanation for the ice ages, the problems of a small amount of heating due to changes in eccentricity and a lack of complete physical explanation for climate change has not led to abandonment of the theory. I think it would have. Instead, an assumed secondary feedback mechanism of some type has been hypothesized for ice age initiation. In other words, a small cooling pulse due to a periodic decrease in solar heating from changes in the orbital parameters triggers some unknown physical mechanism in the Earth's atmosphere system which leads to an ice age. Wow. Cartoon science. The implication of this approach is that the Earth atmosphere system is inherently unstable, and a small perturbation can create massive changes in the climate. Investigators have attempted to show evidence for past climate instabilities using ice core results from the Greenland Ice Core Project, GRIP, but later data from the Greenland Ice Sheet Project, GISP, invalidated this interpretation. They're shooting themselves in the foot. Extreme temperature fluctuations before the last ice age found in the GRIP ice core were not present in the GISP ice core. Evidence for climate instability continues to elude researchers. This is not over a few years, this is over many years. The existence of a climate trigger. The connection between climate and fluctuations in solar heating due to orbital variations is an assumption, not a proven mechanism, and has led to the wild speculation seen frequently in both technical and popular literature. If a trigger for ice ages truly exists in our Earth atmosphere system, then we should obviously be very careful not to do anything which would release the trigger. An inadvertent release of such a trigger could lead to possible chaotic weather conditions, flooding, and drought. Under such conditions, we should obviously restrict the release of pollutants into the atmosphere like smokes and particulates, which are known to produce cooling. However, the assumption of a trigger does not necessarily mean that one exists. In fact, much evidence suggests that the atmosphere is a very stable system, and catastrophic events are required to cause climatic changes in massive as an ice age. I believe the assumption of a trigger is a result of unjustified confidence in the astronomical theory, which in turn is based on uniformitarian processes over millions of years. The current research which is being conducted at ICR, Institute for Creation Research, is beginning to demonstrate that the events of the Genesis flood would naturally produce an ice age. We don't want any religious discussion here, they say. The residual heat remaining in the oceans after the flood would release tremendous quantities of moisture and fall as snow in the polar regions and on mountains for several hundred years after the flood. If ice sheets and layers of seafloor sediments were not laid down slowly over long periods of time, but rapidly over the last few thousand years following the global flood described in Genesis, then the astronomical theory is completely wrong. If the astronomical theory is wrong, there is no need for a trigger, and the concern for a fragile, unstable atmosphere which can suddenly revert to a new ice age is unjustified. So here we come to the end of the ice age. A sudden warming of the climate. Geophysical and paleontological evidence indicate that the glacial age ended rather suddenly. Both the evidence of foraminiferal types, different species inhabit cold waters and warm waters, and oxygen isotope composition in the carbonate of their shells, the ratios of these isotopes is also dependent upon water temperature, unite in indicating a somewhat sharp change from glacial to temperate conditions. Cesar Emiliani. The data indicate a rather sudden change from more or less stable glacial conditions to post-glacial conditions. Now we have another article, Erickson, Broker, Culp, and Wolin. Other lines of evidence, such as a sudden change from deposition of sand to silt in the Mississippi Delta and a rapid desiccation of pluvial lakes, all dated more or less simultaneously, point to the same conclusion. Richard Russell. In summary, shoreline irregularity and the alluvial filling of valleys indicate a recent general rise of sea level, comparatively small areas of deltas and topographical instability along coasts, which is evidenced by rapid advance of delta fronts and anomalous features such as Sapanica Lake, suggests that the rise in the sea level has been rapid. Russell. Still more recently, geologists from Columbia's Lamont Geological Laboratories have noted the recency, geologically speaking, of the sudden warming of the Earth's temperatures. From the evidence listed above, it is clear that a major fluctuation in climate occurred close to 11,000 years ago. That's their estimate. The primary observation that both surface ocean temperatures and deep sea sediment rates were abruptly altered at this time is supplemented by evidence from more local systems. The level of the Great Basin lakes fell from the highest terraces to a position close to that observed at present. The silt and clay load of the Mississippi River was suddenly retained in the alluvial valley and delta. A rapid ice retreat opened the northern drainage systems of the Great Lakes, and terrestrial temperatures rose to nearly interglacial levels in Europe. In each case, the transition is the most obvious features of the entire record. It is obvious more from a previous discussion of the radiocarbon dating assumptions that the 11,000 year date must be too high. So these worldwide events clearly date from about the time of the flood and its after effects. Neither was this warming of the Earth a gradual process occupying thousands or millions of years. Evidence from a number of geographically isolated systems suggests that the warming which occurred at the close of Wisconsin glacial times was extremely abrupt. It seems there must have been a rather abrupt warming of the climate in order for the glaciers to melt and the ocean temperature to change as rapidly as the evidence indicates. This again argues for some sort of explanation outside the scope of doctrinaire uniformitarianism. The flood events, and particularly the associated atmospheric changes, can once again suggest a cause adequate to explain this event. Most of the instant solar energy is contained in the visible radiation, which can penetrate right through the atmosphere. The Earth re-emits the energy it receives from the sun, but being a much cooler body, it does so mainly in the infrared region of the spectrum. Infrared radiation is strongly absorbed by water vapor, carbon dioxide, and ozone. These constituents, therefore act like the glass of a greenhouse. They trap outgoing energy. The effect is of the utmost importance, for without it, the mean surface temperature would be lower by almost 40 degrees centigrade, and life could not exist. D.R. Bates. These three constituents, water vapor, ozone, and carbon dioxide, must have been present in large amounts in the antediluvian atmosphere. The first, water vapor, we have already discussed in connection with the infrared canopy. The waters above the firmament. Ozone would have been formed by reaction of the sun's ultraviolet radiation with molecules of oxygen and water vapor as at present. However, the equilibrium amount of ozone in the atmosphere depends on the temperature of the atmosphere. So that the location of the antediluvian ozonosphere may have been different from the present. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a function of the amount of carbon-producing and carbon-extracting mechanisms on the Earth's surface. Through the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is taken out of the air and used in plant growth, then returned to the air through the processes of expiration, decay, excreta, and burning, and so on. Also, the waters of the ocean exchange carbon dioxide for the atmosphere, the almost amount increasing as the surface temperature increases. The formation of the carbonates in rocks and shells, as well as their weathering out and returning to the atmosphere, also enter the cyclic balance. The amount in the antediluvian atmosphere must have been very high in order to maintain equilibrium for the large amounts of plant life, the large amounts of continental relative to oceanic areas, and the large amount of carbonate fixing organisms in the seas. The effect of this large carbon dioxide and ozone concentration in the antediluvian atmosphere augmented the effect of the canopy in maintaining the ice canopy above the Earth, in maintaining the global greenhouse effect, and in shielding the Earth from harmful short-wave length radiation coming from the sun in outer space. Check that on the canopy, the ice canopy. I've done an article on that. With the flood, these balances were all profoundly modified. Vast areas of plants were buried, and their carbon content was concentrated in coal seams. Extensive bodies of organic materials were converted into petroleum, hydrocarbons. The deluge precipitated the atmospheric ozone and carbon dioxide in all probability along with the canopy. When the canopy was the ice canopy that came down in the flood. That's the water of the flood, plus the ones the below ground basins, temporarily partially denuding the atmosphere of these constituents. Abundant carbon dioxide produced plant growth and a rise in the temperature, ending the ice age. There you go. The lowering of the atmospheric temperature after the flood as a result of these atmospheric changes, especially in higher latitudes, certainly supplies a potent mechanism for initiating glaciation of continental magnitudes. The carbon dioxide remaining in the air would support only limited plant life, as compared with the luxuriant pre-flood stands, and there only limited animal life as well. However, in time there is no doubt but that the shielding effect of the firmament canopy, which came down in the flood, super frozen water, firmament canopy would have been at least in part restored by the formation of the following. The ozonosphere would have soon formed in essentially its present character, since the new hydrologic cycle